Welcome to the Grow Your Law Firm podcast, brought to you by Pilma. This podcast helps lead lawyers to more growth, profit, and freedom. Here is your legal marketing expert and host, Ken Hardison.
Well, hello, everyone. This is Ken Hardison, and welcome to another episode of Grow Your Law Firm. And today we have the pleasure of having Neil Tyra, a state and family lawyer from up in Washington, D.C. area, Maryland area, right? Am I right?
That's correct.
That? Yeah. And Neil's got an interesting story. And I don't know if I want to spoil it or not, but I'll say this. I've talked with him before doing this today, and he has figured a lot of things out, and I want to pick his brain today. So welcome, Neil.
Thank you, Ken. I appreciate it. I'm happy to be here.
And another thing about you is you got your own podcast, and it's called the Entrepreneur.
The Law Entrepreneur.
Yeah, and I just think it's amazing. You know, you said you started that 5 years ago. I mean, nobody was doing. I mean, no lawyers were even thinking about podcasts, and now it's like the big deal now. But back 5 years, you were ahead of your time. You know.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, you're right. And it was it's interesting how I came to get to that point. And now I'm at the point where people are asking me, what do you like doing better? You know, the full-time job of being an attorney or the full-time job of being a successful podcast host. And I don't know that the question of which do you like better is the right question. It might be which do you see yourself doing longer? You know. But I'm at that age where I'm starting to raise those questions.
So tell us a little bit about your history, because you've got a fascinating history. I mean, you just didn't come out of college and go to law school.
No, I didn't, Ken. I like to tell people, law is my fourth career. And it's largely because I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. And so I don't know if there'll be a fifth. But there's certainly been four of them, and they've been quite diverse. I started off cooking for a living, and which made my mother very happy because she didn't have to worry about her son starving to death. So I cooked in some high upscale restaurants here on the East Coast, principally in the Washington, D.C. and Annapolis area, mostly in Annapolis. Did that for a while, and started going to school when I could. During the part-time during the day and working in the restaurants at night, and finally got a degree in information systems management. But along the way, I started working in the space program, and I tell folks that was a job I would have done for free. I was lucky enough to land in the right spot. I worked at the Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland, back in the early 1970s, when the space program was really the apple of everybody's eyes. Worked in the tail end of the Apollo program, into the Apollo-Soyuz joint mission with the Soviets, and then moved into the space shuttle mission. And I got to do some really interesting things, culminating with being a launch coordinator in the program. And it was a job literally I would have done for free. It was just very exciting. And I moved on from there and helped other programs in the Department of Defense, and spent 22 years building hardware and software systems. My last gig was working for Computer Science Corporation, helping to build the air defense system for Iceland. And but there were some issues there, and I was getting to a point of getting a little tired of doing that. And all along the way, I'd also been a practicing martial artist, and I achieved my black belt in a very demanding style, Japanese karate called Goju-ryu karate, very traditional style of hardcore martial arts. And when it came time to think about what I was going to do, one of my black belts said, "Hey, well, why don't we open a commercial martial arts studio and bring traditional karate to the masses?" And so that's what we did. So we opened a school, and the Kenshin Karate School existed for a dozen years. Ultimately, however, I had a great time teaching, taught hundreds and hundreds of kids and adults and all manner of students. But in the end, I'd always had an idea about going to law school. I grew up, in that whole, I'm telling my age now, Perry Mason, LA Law, Boston Legal. There was a lot of glamour around being an attorney, and there's a lot of things that people were doing that were socially responsible, uh, involved in the practice of law, and that appealed to me as kind of an activist. So it always was in the back of my mind, and my kids at that time were getting a little older, and I figured this was my shot. If I was going to go to law school, I needed to do it now, because if I didn't do it then, they'd be going to college, and there's going to be no money after that. That was for sure. So I applied. Was fortunate enough to get into the Catholic University's Columbus School of Law. And so I sold the karate school, and that helped pay for my law school. And I treated law school like a business. I treated it like my job. I went full time during the day. I was the oldest person by far in my class. I was older than several of my law professors. And I graduated at the age of 49. 49? No, I went at 49. Yeah. And so you get old, you can't remember that stuff.
Yeah, I know.
At 49, and I went to work for a small boutique law firm, which is now very successful, doing personal injury in Washington, D.C. I left there after a couple of years, 3 years, as my son was getting old enough. He was going into high school. He was a big time athlete at the time, and I wanted to be able to follow his soccer matches and his wrestling matches. He was captain of both teams, and I don't want to have to ask anybody permission. So I said, well, let me start my own firm. I figured that I'd already owned a business, the martial arts studio, and that I had made every mistake you can make in terms of opening and running a business. So this would be a piece of cake. I didn't give it any thought. What I failed to realize is there a whole new level of mistakes to make when you open a law practice. And so I humbled myself pretty quickly. And but that was 15 or so years ago. I've been practicing on my own since then. I started again doing personal injury as a solo, then added family law, and now have transitioned almost exclusively to estate planning, because again, my kids got older, they moved away, they live on the left coast. And so I want to be able to travel, move about. So tying myself to the courthouse in a family law practice wasn't really a long-term commitment. So I started doing estate planning slowly, and now have transitioned over to that almost exclusively.
So it looks like to me that in your career, your law career anyway, you've tried to make the law practice fit your life instead of you fitting its life. You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah,
that's something that I preach all the time, that you won't, you work to live, you don't live to work, and you really want to practice that works for you and not you for it.
without question. That's one of the things that we don't. I think we don't emphasize enough in the legal practice is that you can go from being a personal injury attorney to being a family law attorney to being a estate planning attorney. Now you have to be competent. You have to meet the obligations of your ethical responsibilities. But there's nobody who says you can't do that.
Yeah.
And each of them has a different kind of uh, set of circumstances and situations. And I wanted to, as you said, fit that to my lifestyle.
Yeah, I think that I admire that. I mean, most lawyers don't think that way. I mean, it's funny, but when I first started, I mean, I used to do criminal, I did Social Security, I did workers' comp, I did small corporations. I was in a rural area, town of about 10,000, and over the years, and I actually did some family law, which I hated, and I got out of that just as quick. Did a little real estate, hated that. I just started popping things off that I hated, and really got down to doing stuff I liked. And I think the key is be able to get up in the morning and look forward to going to your office, or if you're going to your office. I mean, a lot of lawyers now, of course, and I want to get to that, are not even
Mhm.
going to their offices anymore. I mean,
Right.
with the pandemic and everything, with remote work and everything. So, but with all this technology background, kind of give us an idea of like how many employees do you have? Do you outsource your work? How do you leverage technology to help you, run a more smoothly efficient office?
Well, I couldn't do what I do without relying on technology in a big way. Um, when I came to the practice of law, frankly, I was shocked at how poorly positioned attorneys were in the technology world. Look, the big firms had, an IT department and were able to leverage, high value and top notch technology resources to serve their clients. But the vast majority of small and solo and mid-size firms, they didn't do any technology and or very little. Uh, there were attorneys that I knew at the time who were at that point still using dictation. Had a legal secretary that typed everything for them. Um, couldn't operate a fax machine properly. Had to hand something to a person. So I was like, look, technology is going to be a central part of who I am and how I deliver legal services. I was also then an Apple fanboy and still am. And so I knew when I started my practice that I wanted to run my practice on Apple products, which was unheard of at the time. Nobody used Macs in a law office. They all used Windows at that point. And and I wanted to be able, from the very start, I wanted to be able to run my practice remotely. Now, we didn't have the cloud then. Okay, so you had to find a way to use technology such that you had a server in your office or some way to communicate with your computer from outside of the office. And I set up my whole office based on that approach. So from the very beginning, I could work from home as easily as I could work from the office. So I was remote before it was, fashionable, or before it was reasonable to be remote. And then as the technology improved, we moved things up into the cloud and we became more platform agnostic. It didn't matter whether you were working on a Macintosh or a Windows system or a tablet or a phone, which again we didn't have in the early 2000s, or those just coming into fruition. So I wanted to use all those tools, and I use them extensively now. I could not deliver services with the efficiency that I do now, um, if it weren't for technology.
Yeah, it's funny when people don't believe me when I tell them this. I started practicing in 1982, and in 1983, I went in with this. I went in with a law firm there in town, small town, and they didn't have a copier. They used carbon paper
Yeah.
to make copies. We didn't have a word processor. We had a IBM Selectric.
Yep.
I was the first lawyer in our county to buy a word processor. I was the first attorney in our county to buy computers. And what that computer would, that was in 1988, I think. What that computer could do, my phone can do twice as much now.
Oh yeah.
It's,
Well, I was talking about working in the space program. We put people on the moon with less computing power than we carry around in our pocket right now. Yeah.
it's
I mean
just
that.
amazing. I mean, yeah, I guess it's what they call it, the fourth industrial revolution. It's the microchip has been the biggest, I think, game changer for mankind in the last 30, 40 years.
So with all of that, then it allows me also to then take it as other people and other services make themselves available through the use of technology. It allows me to outsource much of what I do. So, so I'm a true solo. Have always been a true solo. I've never had an employee. Um, so, so who answers your phones? Well, I have an answering service now. Again, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, it wasn't really conceivable to have a remote answering service. But now I use Ruby Receptionist, or used to be called Call Ruby. But there are some other great companies out there, like Smith AI as an example.
Yeah.
But I love Call Ruby. I'm partial to them, or Ruby. Um, so they answer my phone, and I get tons of compliments from clients who say, your receptionist is so great, I'd love to meet them. And well, you'd have to go to Seattle, because you're not going to be able to meet, and it's not the same receptionist every time. So so I've outsourced that whole part of answering the phones and setting up meetings, and they're able to screen calls and screen out uh, solicitors and spam calls. So it frees me to do more of what I need to do to generate income. So that was the first thing I outsourced, was that. Then I needed somebody to fortify the financial processing of my practice. So at the time I was doing personal injury work, there's a lot of money that goes back and forth. Money comes in from the adjuster and it goes out to pay the medical providers, and the insurance companies get paid back, and um, the client gets essentially what's left. Hopefully it's enough to put them in a better position than they were in prior to their accident. So I started using a remote firm that would manage the entire financial aspect of the back end of my office. And so I didn't have to worry about uh, cutting checks and sending them and mailing them. And that was great. That was great. When I started doing family law and started billing on an hourly basis, I didn't know how to do that either. So I outsourced to a billing specialist. So all I had to do was keep track of my time. Well, for a tech nerd like me, that was ridiculously simple. I keep it on my phone, and it interfaces with my project management system. And so all I had to do was, at the end of the month, or actually I did it twice a month, send the billing information to my billing specialist. Out goes the bills, and they track the payments and hound the clients as need be. So I didn't have to do anything with the money. It was all handled for me. Now I put a lot of controls in there, because I did see, some people who made mistakes handling accounts. That's
Trust,
the quickest way to lose your license.
trust account.
So, put some controls in there. Also had friend lawyer who gave their secretary check writing authority, and a few years later found out that they had been ripped off to the tune of several $100,000. So I made sure that all that wasn't going to happen, but I outsourced all of that. So that left me to do the legal work and to do the marketing. And now marketing has changed with the advent of well, both the legal work and marketing has changed with the advent of technology and the use of technology. And I threw myself into that, completely, to try and get the most bang for my buck in those areas as well.
So, so what do you think? What do you see the future? Do you think you're going to, with the pandemic, a lot of our PILMA members went remote,
Yeah.
and we got some of them that are going to stay remote. I mean, are you hearing? What are you hearing now? Because you talk to a lot of people that
Yeah.
you're in the know.
I think we are. This is a permanent change for the legal industry.
I do too.
We'll still have offices, and people will still maintain offices, but it's going to be on a much smaller scale. And I will tell you, it's because the clients don't want to
Yeah.
come to the office. I cater in my estate planning practice to to younger clients, clients with, their first house, their first child, their first real job. And one of the things I had noticed when I was starting this process, I was getting them on the phone and making great progress with initial consultations, but I wasn't able to get them to come to the office and sign a retainer agreement. And the whole intake process was breaking down. And so uh, I, I was also at that time working with some of my favorite people, women's flat track roller derby. So shout out to the to the Free State roller derby ladies, the Rock Villains, and the Black Eyed Susies. I got a bunch of them together who I'd done some work with, and asked them the question, like, why aren't you coming to the office? Why wouldn't you come to the office to have a consultation? And they said, I don't have time. I mean, I'd have to take off from work, and I don't get that much time off from work. Um, well, how about if I come to you like after hours? Oh, hell no, they say. And I have to clean the house, you know. All right. Well, I'm pretty technology savvy. How about if we do it over the phone or with the video conference? FaceTime was the platform at the time, and they loved it. They loved it. So I was able to deliver and do entire estate plans without physically meeting the client until it came time to sign the documents. And that was before the pandemic. So when the pandemic hit and everybody was doing the same thing, I didn't have to change a thing. So I think it's, the pandemic's made this mainstream for most attorneys, but I think a lot of attorneys were already feeling the issue that the idea of coming to your office to conduct business is not something that law clients of today really want to do.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think Zoom is changing everything too.
They're going to make a lot of money, aren't they?
Yes. I wish I thought about it.
Well, they were in trouble when it first started because they had some security issues, but to their credit, they worked very hard at addressing those. And they're the big elephant in the room, and they're going to make a lot of money. So, yeah. So I think that's, yes. What do I see in the future? I think that's a really big issue, and so one needs to be cognizant of that. Now, there's some practice areas that don't lend themselves as well to remote work as others, but I think by and large, there has to be a remote component to your practice. Otherwise, you're going to lose business to the competitor. Yeah. The other thing that I see that is dramatically changing is the commodization of law. And there's a lot of attorneys now, and I've spoken to a number on my podcast, who are making legal products available to clients in really bite-sized, smaller pieces, and just kind of like, oh, you need a contract developed? Well, here's a template. You need an agreement, a prenup agreement done. Here's a template. And it allows the client to buy legal products and services in smaller pieces, rather than and not only smaller pieces, but at a known price point. And what the savvy attorney is doing is using those commodities, using those legal products to build a relationship with a client, such that when it comes time to engage in more involved activities, they're the ones that they're going to turn to.
Because they've already developed a relationship.
Yep. They've developed the relationship, and they've made it easy for the client to choose them because they know what kind of work they're going to get.
So are you doing any of that with your estate? Like, are you doing like a power of attorney or things like that for people, form?
Well, there's one other aspect in terms of estate planning, which is lends itself to a lot of innovation. In that is document preparation systems. So there's a lot of estate planning systems that are built on what's called the Hot Docs engine. It's a platform that runs in the cloud or on your PC or doesn't run on a Mac, but it allows you to create essentially these super templates with conditional variables, to use a computer science word. So I can go using my estate planning document preparation system. I can go through and almost like TurboTax. The TurboTax is based on the same kind of concept.
Right.
Complete a questionnaire and answer some specific questions or provide answers to some specific questions that are addressed in all of the estate planning documents, and then hit the button and it generates the documents. Now, I have to review them. I have to make sure that they completely reflect the client's wishes, but I can do that far more efficiently and far more quickly than if I were taking and taking existing documents from a previous client who had a similar set of circumstances and updating them and search and replace and changing them and introducing new errors and leaving out paragraphs that were supposed to be there and having creating just a mess. These document preparation systems, at least for the estate planner, are phenomenally capable these days, and so you're able to deliver the product at a much more reasonable price point, and to do it in a very efficient and profitable way.
Yeah, we used to. I used to do that when I had a big PI practice in North Carolina before I sold it in 2010, and we had that set up for lawsuits because
Yeah,
we had it where I could pop out a lawsuit in like 10 minutes. Just go
right.
through, check, then throw it all together. You still got to look at it, but man, it was so much faster because we were filing so many lawsuits. I mean,
Yeah, yeah. It does.
discovery the same way.
I tell people you'd be shocked at how easy it is to sue somebody. you know, to write a complaint is for a bread and butter traffic accident, which I did hundreds of.
Yeah,
Uh, you could generate a complaint once you have the data. Could generate a complaint in just a few minutes and get
yeah,
that
yeah.
signed and filed. You'd be surprised how quickly you can sue somebody.
So, what do you think about? How do you think, or how is it, or how will it artificial intelligence? How do you think that's going to affect lawyers?
Well, that's always a big question, and I think you get there incrementally. There's concern that we're going to turn over significant components of the practice to quote the robots, and I don't think we ever that people who work in that area of technology ever feel that that's really the case. I think where you're going to start to see machine learning and artificial intelligence, and you've already seen it, is um, is in systems like what I'm talking about in terms of document development systems or uh, case management systems. They're going to have a predictive quality to them based on the circumstances of the data that you're entering. Have a predictive quality. They're going to present an outcome or present a, a series of tasks or what have you to the attorney that they then look at and say, yes, that reflects what I think is going to have to happen in this case. So
Yeah.
I think that's where you're going to see these types of technologies uh, prove valuable.
So, have you talked to any of your podcast guests or talked to anybody or been reading about the non-lawyer ownership of law firms? like out in Arizona and Utah? And
Yeah, I haven't yet, but I think we're going to see more and more of that around the edges,
yeah,
and it's going to be up to the legal community to police that, monitor that, because look, it's not very difficult for a related industry to offer some tangential legal products. And I'm thinking, not to cast aspersions on anybody, but if I were a financial planner, I want to be able to generate powers of attorney and healthcare directives for my clients. It's a natural fit. I don't want to have to give that to another attorney.
right.
So I think that's an area between two professions that in some jurisdictions, they're going to say, well, you know what, that's narrowly enough defined that we can allow that to take place. And that's not the practice of law per se. So you're going to redefine those boundary edges. And I think is where the challenge is going to be. The other thing I think the challenge is when you have people being able to invest in law firms and provide financial resources
For market. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's an insidious encroachment on the legal profession that has some major pitfalls. I mean, if you can imagine a company investing in a mid-sized law firm, a strict financial investment that then suddenly becomes, well, we want you to practice law this way. Now you have people with the money investing in the law firm directing how the law should be practiced. And so it's a slippery slope. So, but I think that's going to be eaten away at around the edges as well.
Yeah, I agree. Anything else you'd like to talk about before we call it a day?
Talking about business, and we can all learn from that. And I one of the reasons I think my podcast and yours as well is successful is people like hearing about others' experiences. When you think about it, this really is what networking is all about.
Yeah.
When before the pandemic, you'd go to a bar association event and you trade stories of war stories about your practice, about your clients, about your cases. And we don't have that right now. And even when that comes back, I think that's going to be less and less palatable to folks. So an opportunity to spend some time with somebody like you in this type of setting is where we're able to share our knowledge and expand our practice. And I think it's useful.
So if people want to hear your podcast, where do they go?
They just look for the Law Entrepreneur. You can find that on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever podcasts are heard. So the Law Entrepreneur. The hardest part of that is spelling entrepreneur. So you
can just type in Neil Tyra and you'll get it.
Well, you could do that too. Neil Tyra, Tyra, and I tell people it's just like Tyra Banks. Tyra Banks married me. She'd be Tyra. Wouldn't that be a mess? So you go to thelawentrepreneur.com, which is our website. You can also listen to our podcast there, and we do some other stuff there, some blogging and some discussion about technology and the law. So that's another place you might want to join us. And then we're on every social media platform you can think of.
Right. Well, listen, Neil, thank you for taking time and being with us today, and take care, my friend.
Ken, it was a pleasure.
All right. Till next time, this is Ken Hardison, dedicated to your success.
You have been listening to the Grow Your Law Firm podcast, the podcast that leads lawyers to more growth, profit, and freedom. Go to growyourlawfirm.com to find more ways to market and manage your law firm. Please leave us a rating and review wherever you listen to your podcasts.